The morning sun spilled over Pinewood Lake like liquid gold, casting a serene glow that made the water shimmer with promise. For Daniel Harper, a retired CIVYL engineer who'd spent 3 decades wrestling with blueprints and concrete, this was his sanctuary. After years of designing bridges and drainage systems, he'd cashed out, bought a modest cabin on the lake's edge, and settled into a life of quiet mornings with a fishing rod and a thermos of black coffee. The cabin sat on a gentle slope, its back porch opening to a patch of reeds that kissed the water's edge, where an old wooden dock stretched out like an NVY Tatayan. He'd paid for the land in full, no mortgage, no liens, no complications, so he thought. That illusion shattered the day he heard the splash. It wasn't the subtle plink of a fish breaking the surface, but a heavy, deliberate soft thud saw the sound of something substantial hitting the water. Daniel grabbed his rod and bolted out to the dock, expecting a fallen branch or maybe a clumsy heron. Instead, he froze. There, gleaming under the sun like a taunt, stood a wrought iron gate, its black bars sunk into the earth, cutting off his dock from the lake. A silver plaque bolted to it read, "Saw private, HOA access only. Violators will be prosecuted." Saw behind it, a security camera blinked red, its lens trained on him like a smug, unblinking eye. His dock, his lake, his property, blocked off as if he were some squatter on his own land. Anger surged through him, hot and sharp, but beneath it simmered a suspicion that something absurdly sinister was brewing. Daniel had chosen Pinewood Lake for its solitude. The cabin, a weathered A-frame tucked among towering pines, was his reward for a career of deadlines and dust. He'd bought the land years before the hemlock pines VY Sound sprouted nearby, a cluster of McMansions with manicured lawns and pretentious mailboxes. He'd never joined their HO and never saw the point. His deed was clear, the cabin, the slope, the dock all his. Or so he'd assumed. Now, staring at the gate, he traced its bars with his eyes. It stretched left and right, a steel ribbon slicing through his piece, running up to his neighbor's property line and looping back toward the private road. Who the hell builds a fence on someone else's land without a word? The answer arrived that afternoon, striding up his gravel path with the confidence of a dictator. Margaret Maggie Ellison, president of the Hemlock Pines Homeowners Association, clutched a clipboard like a scepter. She wore a crisp teal blazer, impractical wedge sandals that crunched awkwardly on the stones, and a smile so tight it could have cracked glass. Before Daniel could speak, she waved a manicured hand at the gate, as if unveiling a masterpiece. "Good afternoon. We've installed a protective barrier around the lake access," she said, her tone bright and rehearsed. "For HOA residents only, of course. Liability concerns, you understand." Daniel blinked, his fishing hat still perched crookedly on his head. "I live right here. That's on my saw dock. My lake access." Maggie tilted her head and let out a laugh high-pitched, patronizing, like he'd told a quaint but foolish joke. "Well, technically, the access strip is now under Hemlock Pines HOA control. You must have missed the notices. We sent several." She tapped her clipboard with a pen, holding it up like a shield. "Safety first, right?" His pulse thumped in his ears. "Notices? I didn't get a damn thing. And how do you even get permission to build this? That land's not yours." "Oh, but it is now," she replied, her voice syrupy sweet. "The HOA acquired the lease last spring. It was managed by old Mr. Grayson, who ran the bait shop down the way. When he passed, God rest his soul, it went up for bid. We secured it and redesignated it as common HOA property." She beamed, as if expecting applause. Daniel's mind raced. The bait shop, a crumbling shack that once sold worms and warm soda, had sat on a narrow strip between his land and the lake. He'd always figured it was part of his deed or a public easement. Apparently not. Maggie had swooped in, claimed it, and turned his backyard into her fiefdom. "So you didn't think to tell the guy who lives here?" he asked, voice tight. "It was discussed at our March meeting." "Fully above board," she chirped. "You're welcome to appeal, though as a non-member, you won't have voting rights." She shrugged, a gesture so dismissive it made his fists clench. He was speechless. He wasn't in the HOA, never signed up for their rules or their dues yet somehow. This clipboard-wielding tyrant had annexed his lake access without so much as a courtesy knock. The next day, fueled by a mix of fury and defiance, he grabbed his bolt cutters and marched to the gate. He'd barely snipped one link when Maggie reappeared, this time with a burly security guard in tow. "That's vandalism," she shrieked, already dialing the sheriff. The deputy who arrived looked baffled, but after consulting property maps, he delivered the gut punch. While Daniel owned the cabin and most of the surrounding land, the strip with the dock and gate was indeed under an HOA lease. "Sorry, man," the deputy muttered. "It's legal." Barely. Maggie watched the scene unfold with a smirk, arms crossed like a general savoring a VY Tory. By week's end, a sign went up. Saw "Do Not Trespass." Dulaw 1,000 fine. Saw the camera kept blinking, a constant reminder of her triumph. Daniel tried the HOA route, attending a meeting that felt like a circus run by petty despots. Maggie presided like a queen, her board either cowed or enthralled. One member, a nervous guy with a comb-over, mumbled, "You're not on the lake roster anymore." Daniel nearly laughed. A lake roster? Then Maggie dangled the ultimate insult. She held the only key to the gate's lock. For days, he stewed. Hire a lawyer and drain his essay VYNGS over a sliver of land? Tunnel under the fence like a cartoon, con VYCT? He even toyed with building a floating dock and launching a kayak armada, just to spite her. Then, fate intervened. Walking the property line, he spotted a saw for sale saw sign on a narrow lot next to the gated strip, the other half of the bait shop parcel, split by some legal quirk. He called the number. The seller, a widow in Montana who'd inherited it from her late husband, didn't even know what she owned. "Make an offer," her agent pleaded. Daniel did, and 2 weeks later, the deed was his. For less than a new truck, he'd bought the land where the gate's posts were anchored. Maggie had leased the access strip, but he now owned the soil beneath her precious barrier. He waited, letting her bask in her VY Tory. The HOA planned a summer picnic on their lakefront, his former dock. Tents went up, a grill smoked, and someone hauled out a karaoke machine. Daniel watched from his porch, sipping coffee, biding his time. The morning of the event, he strolled down with a lockpick not to break in, but to swap the lock. He replaced Maggie's padlock with a heavy-duty one, the kind used on shipping containers, and hung a sign. Saw private property. Access by owner permission only. Then he sat back with a lemonade and waited. Maggie arrived in a floral sundress, clipboard in hand, leading a parade of HOA members in khaki shorts and VY sores. She reached for her key, inserted it, and froze. It didn't turn. She jiggled it, twisted it, then slammed it against the gate, her face reddening. "There's a small issue with the lock," she announced to the crowd, voice strained. "It'll be fixed soon." Her eyes darted up, locking onto Daniel. He waved, then tossed her a copy of his deed. She snatched it from the air, scanning it like it was a ransom note. This is a mistake," she stammered. "You can't buy community property." "You're right," he said, leaning against the fence. "That's why I didn't. I bought some I saw property, the one your gate's standing on, all the way to that oak over there." He pointed, grinning as her jaw dropped. "But we installed this gate. The HOA paid for it." Her voice climbed an octave. "And I own the dirt under it," he replied, thinking of turning it into a trellis. "Maybe some roses." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. A woman in a straw hat, Lydia, the board's treasurer, raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Maggie's face twisted into a scowl. She stormed off, phone pressed to her ear, barking about an emergency meeting. Daniel let her go. The HOA couldn't touch the gate without his say-so on it legally. He filed a notice with the county, marking the fence as partially on private land. Any tampering will be trespassing. Then he added a motion-activated floodlight, its beams sweeping the gate every time someone approached from the HOA side. Not to record, just to remind them he was watching. Maggie fought back. First came a letter accusing him of undermining community spirit. Then a legal threat citing some vague HOA clause about cooperative land use. Daniel sent back his deed with a sticky note. Saw cooperate this. Saw Lydia paid him a VY sit soon after, Not hostile, just intrigued. Maggie didn't clear this with anyone, she admitted as they walked the fence line. She told us it was uncontested HOA land. It wasn't. She spent $5,000 of our dues fencing something we don't own. She shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Guess she'll need a stronger clipboard, Daniel quipped. The HOA's tune changed fast. Rumors of financial audits and board resignations swirled. Maggie filed a zoning complaint, claiming the gate was a public safety feature. The county inspector disagreed, confirming Daniel's ownership and ordering her to cease any events on his land without permission. Her next move was desperate. She hired a locksmith to swap the lock again. The guy arrived, checked the property markers, and called Daniel. "This yours?" he asked. Eyeing the deed, Daniel handed him over a plate of brownies. "Yup." The locksmith grinned, took a brownie, and left. That night, Daniel set up a folding chair behind the gate, cracked a beer, and watched the stars. A few HOA folks wandered by, some sheepish, some friendly. One dropped off a six-pack, muttering, "Thanks for sticking it to her." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was his. But Maggie wasn't done. She escalated to water warfare. Small boats, paddle boats, kayaks started docking at the back of his property, their occupants claiming it was community lakefront. A newsletter, penned by Maggie, declared new boat landing zones. Daniel added a line to his sign. Saw a parcel to 4721. Trespassing prohibited. Saw the county stepped in again, ruling the HOA had no claim to VY Gable waters. Orange buoys Maggie strung across the lake labeled Saw Community Swim area saw vanished within days, yanked by officials. Then came the leak. A teenager, Ethan, slipped Daniel a folder of HOA meeting minutes his mom had left out. Inside, plans for lawsuits, a reclamation strategy, and a vote to redesignate his land as a common greenway. Maggie was trying to steal it back through bureaucracy. Daniel didn't just react struck. With help from an old colleague at the zoning office, he reclassified his strip as a protected eco-habitat under a state preservation clause. No development, no events, no HOA picnics, nothing without his approval. The county slapped a sign on the gate. Saw environmental rest corridor. So, Maggie unraveled. She was caught one evening, screwdriver in hand, prying at the gate's hinges. "Just checking for damage," she lied when Daniel loomed over her. "Camera says otherwise," he replied, pointing to the floodlight. She fled, dignity in tatters. The final blow came when Lydia pushed for an audit. Maggie had blown due lot $12,000 on fencing, cameras, and a board retreat at a luxury bivouac. Suspended, then resigned, she blamed hostile neighbors. Daniel went back to fishing. Peace settled in until Maggie resurfaced online. From Florida, she launched Saw Save Pinewood Shores Saw, a crusade of TikToks and YouTube rants calling Daniel a lake tyrant. Clips went viral, hashtags like Saw the Gate Saw trending. Strangers mailed him letters. One offered to crowdfund a community buyback. Then the internet turned. Reddit sleuths dug up Maggie's past HOA scandals. A deranged trip ad VYEW about a rude barista. Memes of Daniel in his fishing chair captioned Saw Lord of the Docks Saw Flooded X. A local station ran a segment. Saw retiree outweets HOA. Saw he declined an inter VYEW, but they aired it anyway. Maggie's campaign imploded when the county fined her due law $15,000 for forged permits. Her post stopped. She sent Daniel a letter, not an apology, but a note about learning from conflict, with a pamphlet for an HOA reform group. He didn't reply. Instead, he removed the gate's lock, Leah VYing it open with a new sign. Saw access by courtesy. Respect earns welcome. Saw kids fished, neighbors waved, and Ethan now a regular asked permission before casting a line. Grandpa said it's better to ask, he grinned. Daniel handed him a slip and a spare rod. A year later, at a lake cleanup event, Lydia honored Daniel with a plaque, Saw for integrity and patience. Saw kids held signs, Saw Gate Hero Saw, and he laughed despite himself. That evening, Maggie returned, unannounced. She stood by the gate, staring at the water, a small box in hand. Still got the key? She called. He raised his thermos. Don't need it. She nodded, left quietly, and vanished into the dusk. As marshmallows roasted and Ethan reenacted the saga with twigs, Daniel sat by the lake. The gate stood, weathered but Opina relic of a petty war won with patience, not padlocks. The water lapped gently, and for the first time in years, it felt like his again. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.